Hey everyone, so this is going to be part 2 of that long update. So in the last update I showed you that I have a model editor and I have configured a shape for a ship. And so we can see that this ship is using only 2 cubes, and cubes are very fast, so this should be really fast collision. I didn't explain what that blue square was. That is a cube that is basically fitted around the model. So it's like the minimum axis aligned bounding box for the model. And that's a pretest. So if you put like 100 shapes in here, this blue like cuboid rectangle shape will be the first point of collision test. So if you have 2 of these ships and their blue squares don't align, it doesn't test all of those small objects you made. It just tests those 2 blue cuboids and it can tell that they're not colliding. If they are colliding, then it starts having to test all those red shapes. Okay, so after I got that configured and serializing to JSON, I needed to start spawning things in. And so on this basic test level, now all of these little ships are using that spawn configuration that the model editor created. These big ships are not yet configured. I need to make those, but I'll get to that. And so what I've added now is this panel inside of the test level where you can control things. And one of those things is the visualization of like the spatial hashing grids. And so you can see the big ships are not in the spatial hash yet either, but these red cubes are now controlled. The visualization of those red cubes is now controlled by this little thing here. We can also turn on the projectiles hitbox. I don't know if you can see that. There's a blue hitbox around the projectile if I turn that on. But I also added it for debugging purposes, the ability to visualize those configured shapes. And drawing all those shapes is actually not done in a performant way, so it trashes the frame rate. So here's our ship flying, and you can see those red cubes and that blue cube around it. That's the pretest. I'm going to turn that off just so I can have some decent frame rate. Looks like if I just draw the blue cubes, I'm okay on frame rate. So what I also added is the ability for these projectiles to collide with these ships now. And so if you can see that if it actually collides with the ship, it does not go through it. If I shoot beside it, it goes through it, but so I have basic collision set up, which took a really long time, but I'm very happy about. I don't know how performant it is. I don't know if every one of these ships could be shooting without trashing the frame rate. That's something I'll have to do next, but I did make it so that the projectiles will hit a ship and notify the ship. There's like an interface you can inherit from that is notified on projectile collision. So that's that. Another thing I added was, because this was really hard to debug, I added a time system to the entire engine that I'm writing, and that allows you to do things like dilate time. So I can actually speed up and slow down time. If you watch those ships, they're moving faster, slowing down time. And one thing I also added is the ability to freeze time. So I can freeze time, and now everybody is stopped and time is frozen, and I can right click to step time. So just make sure I put that on a time dilation of about 1. Oh, I got a reset button. So 1 is pure real time and not slowed down. So slowing it down is taking it to a lower number, and speeding it up is taking it to a higher number. I need to fix this panel because it's clipping text, I see. Anyways, and so if I fire a projectile, I can now step through and watch the projectile travel. And so that was 1 frame, then if I right click, it'll let it do another frame. And it looks like I may have missed it. Nope, I hit it. So there is logic in place that when it collides with the ship, it will stretch the projectile to the collision point, roughly speaking. And see if I can show it. Yeah. This is not the greatest, but it roughly collided with that, and since our cube kind of overlaps some empty space, it theoretically could still collide with that empty space, but it's very fast. It's a very fast test. It's a compromise. We could go in and add more shapes to make it perfectly aligned with those wings, and then they wouldn't collide, but I'm choosing speed over exact matching in this case. And so that's that, and you can step through time that way, and that should make debugging things in the future a lot easier. In the process of creating this time system at an engine level, I also made the ability to set timers, so you can set a timer for like 5 seconds, and then after the 5 seconds is up, your function that you want called will be called through a delegate that way. And I also had to implement delegates, but I've had that implemented for a while. Anyways, those are language or programming specific things. But what I did need is a way to test these things. So I created a system for automated testing and added some timer test to that. And so if we run this in the console, you can see automated testing is turned on, and it's beginning some timer test, and passed all the tests, and automated testing is now over. I can turn that off by defining a flag, so false, basically a macro that says 0 instead of 1, and this doesn't happen when you boot up the game, but when I need testing now, I should be able to add it to this automated testing system and have the test done that way, which will make my life a lot easier when refactoring. I can just run all the tests and make sure they still pass. And so I have similar tests for like separating access theorem and actually for delegates too, but they're not in this system yet. I need to add them. And that's basically the update for now. I think the next thing is to see how performant this actually is, because the projectiles are doing queries through the spatial hash as they move through them. And so I don't have it displayed. They're not actually being inserted in the spatial hash, but they are, as they travel through cells, looking to see if there's an object in the cell, and if there is, doing a collision test with it. And that shouldn't be too slow, unless there actually is a ton of models in the cell, I guess. But I've noticed that the hash map implementation I'm using the reads to it are not super fast. I mean, I think in theory they are order constant time amortized, but perhaps maybe it's not good on the cache or something like that, and they're not. Just doing queries has a little bit of overhead, and if you do a ton of queries, there might be a lot of overhead. And clearly there are a lot of ships here. So we'll see where I go next, and I'll post an update to that. Thanks.